We continue Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough, by starting upon Philopoemen. Cleander was a man of high birth and great power in the city of Mantinea, but by the chances of the time happened to be driven from thence, there being an intimate friend betwixt him and Craugis, the father of Philopoemen, who was a person of great distinction. He settled at Megalopolis, where his friend lived, and had all he could desire. When Craugis died, he repaid the father's hospitable kindness in the care of the orphan son, which means Philopoemen was educated by him, as Homer says, Achilles was by Phoenix, and from his infancy molded to lofty and noble inclinations. But Academus and Demosthenes had the principal tuition of him. After he was past the years of childhood, they were both megalopolitans. They had been scholars in the academic philosophy and friends to Arcesilaus, and had, more than any of their contemporaries, brought philosophy to bear upon action and state affairs. They had freed their country from tyranny by the death of Aristodemus, whom they caused to be killed. They had assisted Aratus in driving out the tyrant Nicocles from Sicyon, and at the request of Corinthians, whose city was in a state of extreme disorder and confusion, went thither by sea and succeeded in establishing good government and happily settling their commonwealth. And among their best actions, among themselves, counted the education of Philopoemen, thinking they had done a general good to Greece by giving him the nurture of philosophy, which a lot of people confuse philosophy as like, oh, you learn quotes. No, it's a method. I mean, you can learn quotes as part of it, but... And indeed, all Greece, which looked upon him as a kind of latter birth brought forth after so many noble leaders in her decrepit age, loved him wonderfully, and as his glory grew, increased his power, and one of the Romans, to praise him, calls him the last of the Greeks, as if after him Greece had produced no great man, nor who deserved the name of Greek. His person was not, as some fancy, deformed, for his likeness is yet to be seen at Delphi. The mistake of the hostess of Megara was occasioned, it would seem, merely by his easiness of temper and his plain manners. This hostess, having word brought her that the general of the Achaeans was coming to her house, in the absence of her husband, was all in a hurry about providing his supper. Philopoemen, in an ordinary cloak, arriving in this point of time, she took him for one of his own train who had been sent on before, and bid him lend her his hand in her household work. He forthwith threw off his cloak, and fell to cutting up the firewood. The husband returning, and seeing him at it, "What," says he, "may this mean, O Philopoemen?" "I am," replied he in his Doric dialect, "paying the penalty of my ugly looks." Titus Flaminius, jesting with him upon his figure, told him one day he had well-shaped hands and feet, but no belly, and he was indeed slender in the waist, but this raillery was meant to the poverty of his fortune, for that he had good horse and foot, but often wanted money to entertain and play them. These are common anecdotes told of Philopoemen, and if one has one good-looking feature, one good feature, that should be enough for there's going to be someone where that's enough, right? The love of honor and distinction was, in his character, not unalloyed with feelings of personal rivalry and resentment. He made Epaminondas his great example, and came not far behind him in activity, sagacity, and incorruptible integrity, but his hot, contemptuous temper continually carried him out of the bounds of that gentleness, composure, and humanity which had marked Epaminondas, and this made him thought a pattern rather of military than of civil virtue. He was strongly inclined to the life of a soldier even from his childhood, and he studied and practiced all that belonged to it, taking great delight in managing of horses and handling of weapons, because he was naturally fitted to excel in wrestling. Some of his friends and tutors recommended his attention to athletic exercises, but he would first be satisfied whether it would not interfere with his becoming a good soldier. They told him, as was the truth, that one life was directly opposite to the other, the requisite state of body, the ways of living, and the exercises all different. The professed athlete sleeping much and feeding plentifully, punctually regular in his set times of exercise and rest, and apt to spoil all by every little exercise, the excess or breath, by every little excess or breach of his usual method, whereas the soldier ought to train himself in every variety of charge and irregularity, and above all to bring himself to endure hunger and loss of sleep without difficulty. Philopoemen, hearing this, not only laid by all thoughts of wrestling, and contemned it then, but when he came to be general, discouraged it by all marks of reproach and dishonor he could imagine, as a thing which made men otherwise excellently fit for war to be utterly useless and unable to fight on necessary occasions. When he left off his masters and teachers and began to bear arms in the incursions which his citizens used to make upon the Lacedaemonians for pillage and plunder, he would always march out the first and return the last. When there was nothing to do, he sought to harden his body and make it strong and active by hunting and laboring in his ground. He had a good estate about 20 furlongs from the town, and thither he would go every day after dinner and supper, and when night came, throw himself upon the first mattress in his way, and there sleep as one of the laborers. At break of day he would rise with the rest, and work either in the vineyard or at the plough. From thence return again to the town, and employ his time with his friends, or the magistrates in public business. What he got in the wars he laid out on horses, or arms, or ransoming captives, but endeavored to improve his own property the justest way, by tillage, and this not slightly by way of diversion, but thinking it his strict duty, so to manage his own fortune as to be out of the temptation of wronging others. And that's a very essential thing when it comes to public life, is that one is, doing the public business for, well, the political side of that, right? As much for itself and as much for the benefit of others, and trying to, have your own wealth by that. One finds in the example of Muhammad is that he, was using his money to free the money that he got as, from his share of the bounty in war and stuff like this, to feed others, to free slaves and stuff like this. He, he didn't need to eat frugally, but he definitely ate frugally, because he wanted to use that opportunity to help others and to more honorably get the money by working, business-wise. He spent much time on eloquence and philosophy, but selected his authors and cared only for those by whom he might profit in virtue. In Homer's fictions, his attention was given to whatever he thought apt to raise the courage. Of all other books, he was most devoted to the commentaries of Evangelus on military tactics, and took delight, at leisure hours, in the histories of Alexander, thinking that such reading, unless undertaken for mere amusement and idle conversation, was to the purpose for action. Even in speculations on military subjects, it was his habit to neglect maps and diagrams, and to put the theorems to practical proof on the ground itself. He would be exercising his thoughts and considering as he traveled, and arguing with those about him of the difficulties of steep or broken ground, what might happen at rivers, ditches, or mountain passes, in marching, in close or in open, in this or in that particular form of battle. The truth is, he indeed took an immoderate pleasure in military operations and in warfare, to which he devoted himself as the special means for exercising all sorts of virtue, and utterly condemned those who were not soldiers, as drones and useless as in the Commonwealth. When he was 30 years of age, Cleomenes, king of the Lacedaemonians, surprised Megalopolis by night, forced the guards, broke in and seized the marketplace. Philopoemen came out upon the alarm and fought with desperate courage, but could not beat the enemy out again, while he succeeded in effecting the escape of the citizens who got away, while he made head against the pursuers, and amazed Cleomenes, till after losing his horse and receiving several wounds, with much ado he came off himself, being the last man in the retreat. The Megapolitans escaped to Messina, whither Cleomenes sent to offer them their town and goods again. Philopoemen, perceiving them to be only too glad at the news, and eager to return, checked them with a speech, in which he made them sensible that what Cleomenes called restoring the city was rather possessing himself of the citizens, and through their means securing also the city for the failure. The mere solitude would of itself ere long force him away, since there was no staying to guard empty houses and naked walls. These reasons withheld the Megalopolitans, and gave Cleomenes a pretext to pillage and destroy a great part of the city and carry away a great booty. The spoils of war. Some people may not know what that means, but if you've made it this far, you probably have a better vocabulary than that. A while after King Antigonus coming down to succor the Achaeans, they marched with their united forces against Cleomenes, who, having seized the avenues, lay advantageously posted on the hills of Cilicia. Antigonus drew up close by him, with a resolution to force him in his strength. Philopoemen, with the citizens, was that day placed among the horse, next to the Illyrian foot, a numerous body of bold fighters, who completed the line of battle, forming together with the Achaeans the reserve. Their orders were to keep their ground and not engage till, from the other wing, where the king fought in person, they should see a red coat lifted up on the point of a spear. The Achaeans obeyed their order and stood fast, but the Illyrians were led on by their commanders to the attack. Euclides, the brother of Cleomenes, seeing the foot thus severed from the horse, detached the best of his light-armed men, commanding them to wheel about and charge the unprotected Illyrians in the rear. This charge putting things in confusion, Philopoemen, considering those light-armed men would be easily repelled, went first to the king's officers to make them sensible what the occasion required, but they not minding what he said, but slighting him as a hare-brained fellow, as indeed as was not yet of any repute sufficient to give credit to a proposal of importance, he charged with his own citizens. The first encounter, disorder, and soon after put the troops to flight with great slaughter. Now, references to animals, you can say that you have insults and compliments and stuff in between, right? And it really depends how you take it. The brains or the intellect of every creature is for it to do its task. And it may not be, it may actually, some are actually smarter, but in some ways they're not as smart as some other critters, you know. Then, to encourage the king's army further, to bring them upon the enemy, while he was in confusion, he quitted his horse, and fighting with extreme difficulty in his heavy horseman's dress, in rough uneven ground full of watercourses and hollows, had both his thighs struck through with a thong javelin. It was thrown with great force, so that the head came out on the other side, and made a severe, though not a mortal, wound. There he stood a while, and, as if he had been shackled, unable to move, the fastening which joined the thong to the javelin made it difficult to get it drawn out, nor would any about him venture to do it. But the fight being now at the hottest, and likely to be quickly decided, he was transported with the desire of partaking in it, and struggled and strained so violently, setting one leg forward, the other back, that at last he broke the shaft in two, and thus got the pieces pulled out. Being in this manner set at liberty, he caught up his sword, and running through the midst of those who were fighting in the first ranks, animated his men, and set them afire with emulation. Antigonus, after the victory, asked the Macedonians to try them. How it happened the horse had charged without orders before the signal, they answering that they were against their wills forced to it by a young man of Megalopolis, who had fallen in before his time. This young man, replied Antigonus, smiling, did like an experienced commander. This was as natural, brought Philopoemen into great reputation. Antigonus was earnest to have him in his service, and offered him very advantageous conditions, both as to command and pay. But Philopoemen, who knew that his nature brooked not to be under another, would not accept them. Yet, not enduring to live idle, and hearing of wars in Crete for practice sake, he passed over thither. He spent some time among those very warlike and, at the same time, sober and temperate men, improving much by experience in all sorts of service. Then he returned with so much fame that the Achaeans presently chose him commander of the horse. These horsemen at the time had neither experience nor bravery, it being the custom to take any common horse, the first and cheapest they could procure, when they were to march, and on almost all occasions they did not go themselves, but hired others in their places, and stayed at home. Their former commanders winked at this, because, it being an honor among the Achaeans to serve on horseback, these men had great power in the commonwealth, and were able to gratify or molest whom they pleased. Molest is meaning the opposite, bothering, not the other meaning. Of course, they include that in this. The Philopoemen, finding them in this condition, yielded not to any such considerations, nor would pass it over as a formality, but went himself from town to town, where, speaking with the young men one by one, he endeavored to excite a spirit of ambition and love of honor among them, using punishment also where it was necessary, and then by public exercises, reviews, and contests in the presence of numerous spectators, in a little time he made them wonderfully strong and bold, and which is reckoned of greatest consequence in military service, light and agile. With use and industry they grew so perfect, to such a command of their horses, such a ready exactness in wheeling around in their troops, that any change of posture, the whole body seemed to move with all the faculty and promptitude, as it were with the single will of one man. In the great battle, which they fought with the Aetolians, the Eleans by the river Larissus, he set them an example himself. Demophantus, general of the Elean horse, singled out Philopoemen and rode with full speed at him. Philopoemen awaited his charge, and before receiving the stroke, with a violent blow of his spear threw him dead to the ground, upon whose fall the enemy fled immediately. And now Philopoemen was in everybody's mouth as a man who, in actual fighting, with his own hand yielded not to the youngest, nor in good conduct to the oldest, and there came not into the field any better soldier or commander. Aratus, indeed, was the first who raised the Achaeans, inconsiderable till then, into reputation and power, by uniting their divided cities into one commonwealth, and establishing amongst them a humane and truly Grecian form of government. And hence it happened, as in running waters, where, when a few little particles of matter once stop, others stick to them, and one part strengthening another, the whole becomes firm and solid. So in a general weakness, when every city, relying only on itself, all Greece was giving way to an easy dissolution, the Achaeans first forming themselves into a body, and then drawing in their neighbors round about, some by protection delivering them from their tyrants, others by peaceful consent, and by neutralization, designed to bring all Peloponnesus into one community. And I guess I have to stop there.